Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Cameron. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We're really delighted to have you here. It's so nice to see so many of you introducing yourself from all over the country and world, really. So we're really delighted to have this webinar today. We're going to be talking about how we can support our youth with trauma-informed practices, even in our virtual settings. And we're excited to hear from you all as well, the experiences that you've gained over the last year in doing this work in virtually. And we're excited to have some grantee experts and some experts here at RTI. And for some reason, my computer isn't liking me today, so I'm spinning, but I hope that we'll advance to the next slide. I'm really delighted to be joined by Hannah Feeney, who is works in our applied. Oh, wait, first I'm going to do a little webinar logistics. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Everyone is currently muted. If you're having trouble hearing us, you make sure you check your audio volume and enable your speakers. If you're still having trouble after doing that, again, look for Cameron Johnson. If you're comfortable, we welcome you to share your video. You can use the chat box to connect with each other. You can also use the Q&A feature, as Cameron mentioned. I would recommend using the Q&A for questions because we can make sure that we're getting those, and maybe chats for other items. All right, now I'm going to introduce our panel. I'm really delighted to be joined by Hannah Feeney, who's a community psychologist here at RTI, and she does a lot of work in the justice community. Also by Lisa Saavedra, who's a research psychologist here at RTI, and she does a lot of work on telemedicine and mental health for young people and all age people. Leslie Estrella from West Care Pacific Islands. We're so delighted. I know it's like crazy early in the morning on Friday for Leslie, so we're really excited that she is with us, and we're excited to hear what they're doing in her community. And we have Brooke Becker from the Baby Safe program at Healthy Futures of Texas, as well as Corey Rodriguez. And we're delighted to hear what you all are going to be sharing as well. So I just want to go over what our goals are for this webinar. They were reflected in the information that you received in advance via email. By the end of this webinar, we hope you'll be able to identify key aspects of trauma-informed virtual implementation, identify at least 3 new strategies for how you can ensure that your virtual programming is delivered from a trauma-informed perspective, and describe opportunities for modeling trauma-informed practices within your programming for youth. In terms of an agenda, we're going to give you an overview of trauma-informed approaches. We're going to walk through the considerations for implementation before programming, during programming, and after programming. And we'll talk about this a little bit, or throughout the presentation, we'll be talking about if it's kind of live virtual together, where everyone's together at the same time, or synchronous learning, or asynchronous, where maybe you're offering up information and youth might be accessing it at a time when you're not with them. And that has different implications for how you can ensure that it's being done in a trauma-informed way. As I mentioned, hear from Leslie and Brooke and Corey. We'll have time for questions and answers at the end, and potentially throughout if it is necessary. And then we'll provide you with some more resources and some ideas for how we can think about moving forward. Before we get started, I was hoping you might indulge me and in the chat share with each other how has your program worked to create safe and welcoming spaces for your program participants, thinking specifically about adaptations you've made to this with the virtual context. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to think about that and write in the chat. So Letisa mentioned using school guidelines. Oh, and I see. It doesn't look like we were able to write to everyone. So I'll go ahead and read them. If you just want to write them in the chat, I can read them out loud to everyone. Evelyn says that they do a lot of virtual check-ins and team building with participants before doing anything else. Great. Being accessible at most times, and sort of what that means for our young people. Always watching chat for private messages, setting up group guidelines in advance, incorporating check-ins with students at the beginning of lesson implementation. Great. Reiterated for your participants the right to pass. Awesome. So if they don't feel comfortable. And another recommendation is playing music, which I think, music can be really powerful and evoke emotions. So, thinking about that. Breakout rooms, using music, videos to keep everyone engaged, and rules and guidelines to follow for all. Incorporating consent into group agreements, creating a safe space to say yes or no to all parts of the programming, and train facilitators to observe for signs of disengagement or indication of a change in students' engagement level. That's really helpful. Making sure you create group agreements and consent, using polls for attendance, and adding icebreakers. Awesome. Janet says they've added resource slides to the PowerPoint so they have access to, and included a slide and a time to let students know so visually letting and verbally letting people know they're in a safe space, letting them know that topics can be difficult and they can take a break or reach out for support. Using music and group agreements. Great. Thank you so much for sharing. These are really, really excellent ideas. Our next question, to get you started here, get you thinking, is we were curious just to get a sense of who's in the room. If we were in person, we would have you raise your hand or stand up. But is your program using an asynchronous, synchronous, or hybrid approach? And I have the definitions here on the slide. If you can't read them, you can try moving around your various Zoom materials. And thank you to those who are participating. I'll share the results in just a couple more seconds. All right. Looks like we have more than half of people. Great. So we'll share the results. You can see here, it looks like a nice mix between synchronous and hybrid, or both. So that's really helpful to know. And Erica mentions that they're 100% in school. So Erica, we're going to be talking specifically about tips for a virtual setting, which might be helpful to you as you think about if you're going to offer it virtually in any context. Oh, and Diane also mentions that this is a different setup that some of you might have, is their program has where the students are all together and the teachers in a different place connected virtually, which definitely has implications when we think about the ability to read room dynamics or body language or that sort of thing. So I look forward, and Lori mentions that's what they're doing too. I look forward to kind of diving into that. And if for those of you who might not be implementing in exactly the same way that we're talking about, please feel free to write in questions or a chat. If you want to explore with others in more depth, kind of like how you might adapt those techniques for different settings. Great, thank you. And I think as you'll see, some of the challenges I think we're facing now is that we're all implementing in a slightly different way. And so what does that mean for how we can learn from each other in a way that ensures that we're making sure we're staying trauma informed? With that, I'm going to turn it over to Hannah, who's going to take us through an overview of some of these approaches. All right, we see your screen now, Hannah. Perfect.
All right, and can you hear me okay?
Yep.
All right, you can see me, you can hear me. Perfect, I appreciate it. I appreciate all of you sharing your thoughts on the different ways that you're already starting to implement some trauma-informed, thoughtful approaches to supporting students during this time. I think we're going to cover some of the things that you've talked about already, so I hope that you think about them in a new way. Maybe we introduce you to some new ideas, or you think about how they might be different for synchronous versus asynchronous formats moving forward. But to get started, I just kind of wanted to tap into what does it mean to be trauma informed. I know a lot of you are already familiar with this concept because you're doing it already, right? You were doing it in person, you're trying to do it online potentially now, but because trauma-informed approaches are so inconsistently implemented, I thought we'd all just get on the same page here and address how I'm thinking about it right now. This is adapted from SAMHSA's guidance for a trauma-informed approach. And there's just kind of four main categories, right? So understanding the impact of trauma, and that generally trauma can come from a variety of places, have a wide breadth and depth of impacts, mental, emotional, physical, psychosocial impacts, and that healing through trauma is not linear. So something that may have happened years ago or yesterday might have really differential impacts on a youth. Also, for being trauma informed, it means being able to carefully recognize and routinely screen for that impact of trauma. And when I say that, I don't mean having like a formal screening tool that you're implementing at the beginning and end of each class, but rather just being consistently aware of the fact that students' responses and the way that they're engaging with the material could potentially be impacts of triggers or trauma, right? And then that next step comes into place next. So being able to respond empathetically and by making resources available to those youth. So this idea is kind of tapping into, you don't have to be the one that does everything that fixes the trauma, but you just find resources to be available in an attempt to be trauma informed. And then the last one I have here is actively avoid re-traumatization. And we're going to talk about that a little bit throughout the presentation today, ways to be trauma informed and try not to re-traumatize folks when presenting potentially sensitive material. But all these things are hard to do, hard to keep top of mind. So we're going to be talking about some strategies. And before we do that, I also just wanted to list these 6 key principles to a trauma-informed approach that SAMHSA has put out. We have a link to that in our resources, and I'm not going to go through each of these, but you're going to see these themes of safety and trustworthiness and transparency, peer support, collaboration, empowerment, voice and choice, and addressing the cultural, historical, and gender issue context of some of these topics throughout the presentation today. So I'm not going to be highlighting them necessarily, but you're going to see them all throughout. And if you are interested in diving deeper into this, I would say this is an excellent resource to use. So what sexual health education topics could cause a trauma response? And really the answer, I think, is any of them, right? So whether it be talking about healthy relationships and consent to non-consensual experiences, circumstances of discussing contraception or condom demonstrations, abstinence and STIs, or even those components about gender identity and expression, so talking about anatomy and physiology. All of these, depending on an individual's background, could elicit a trauma response or could potentially be triggering. And here I'll pause to note that I think that the Michigan Organization for Adolescent Sexual Health, which is where I pulled some of this content from, or adapted from, they've done some great work on this topic on trauma-informed sexual health education, and also have started doing some work on transitioning to virtual spaces. So I collaborated with one of their team members to make sure I was catching absolutely everything that I wanted to talk about today, and I've included their resources at the end of at the bottom, and then in our research page at the end too. So I would check them out and connect with them if you have any questions there. Okay, so given that any of these topics could cause a trauma response, what exactly are you preparing for then, particularly in the scenario of a virtual atmosphere? I mean, the things that we might expect, right? So student disclosures, difficult conversations, and then particularly for the virtual environment, the inability to have this in-person connection with students who have experienced triggers. And so the reason you might want to prepare for this in particular in a virtual setting as compared to a traditional in-person space is that students are stressed right now, right? Like things are different. They might have a lower threshold for managing their feelings or are adopting new coping mechanisms in this current environment. And another thing to consider is that students might be taking your course and engaging with this content in the context of where and how they've experienced that trauma, right? So if it was experienced at home and then they're taking their class at home, that could be particularly difficult. Another thing to consider is that some students or all students really have different ways that they like to engage online versus in person. I mean, we all do. So some students might feel less comfortable engaging in a difficult conversation online, but others might have this freedom to type things and say things that they might not say otherwise, because they're not going to leave the room and then go walk to math class with everybody that they were just sitting with, right? Like they can close their computer, walk away, turn off their camera. So you might be engaging with conversations that you wouldn't have under more typical circumstances. So all of these things tend to both synchronous and asynchronous environments, right? They're going to look different in each situation. So for example, a student disclosure that's happening live in class will look different, and the way you respond to it will look different if it's typed into a chat feature in like a Blackboard-like setting. So I'm going to try to call out some of the different opportunities where synchronous and asynchronous might be particularly different, but I'm sure you'll notice those as well. And please feel free to jump into the chat box and type, you know, what strategies you might use that look different based on the approach you're taking here. Okay, so next, let's actually get into some of these considerations and examples for implementing this type of trauma-informed approach. We're going to break this down into a before, during, and after class, you know, break it down that way. So let's start with things that you can do before the class even starts as you're preparing for class to support students in this way. So I have a few ideas, of course. The first is really just to understand any rules and processes that your community has regarding mandatory reporting. And I'm going to bring up mandatory reporting a couple different times, not because I love it and I think it's the best thing, but more because it is so crucial to understand your mandatory reporting requirements and how they might be different for these differential virtual spaces, so that you can build that trustworthiness and transparency with the students who have the potential to disclose to you, right? So if there's potential that there's differences in your mandatory reporting requirements, or maybe that your district hasn't quite figured them out for these online settings. So what's different about a student typing it in an anonymous Q&A in Zoom? Like, what do you do then? How do you handle that scenario? So I think understanding those things really well, so that way you can describe them to students really well, is critical, and knowing that before class even starts. Another really important thing to do is to collect resources ahead of time. And I appreciate so many of you typing in the chat that this is something you're already doing. You're sharing resources, potentially local advocacy resources, but maybe also national hotlines. And a really unique opportunity for the virtual setting is that you can share resources that students can pull up while they're taking the class and potentially experiencing scenarios where they need additional coping mechanisms, right? So whether those resources be grounding activities that they can access online, like a mandala coloring website, or the RAIN sexual assault hotline chat feature, they can have that open on the side, chatting with somebody while they're taking your course if necessary. So think about what those different resources might be for you and the different classes that you're facilitating, and collect those resources ahead of time. I would also recommend having a pre-meeting with the classroom teacher if that's relevant to you. And I'll bring up a couple different opportunities throughout of what kinds of things could be discussed during this meeting. But the summary is kind of, you know, touch base ahead of time, understand the dynamics of the class, and try to work as a team to make sure that you're supporting these students through potentially difficult conversations. So the next thing that you can do before class is familiarizing yourself with reactions to trigger cues. So we'll talk about this a little bit more and what those trigger cues might be. So this is going to be different for synchronous and asynchronous environments, of course, because if you can't see your students live, then you're going to be looking for trigger cues in different ways, right? If you are in person with them, again, of course, that looks different. So I'm not going to get into all of the nitty-gritty details here because I know some of my co-presenters have things to say about this topic. But the summary here is that these you're going to want to be looking for students that are acting differently than is typical for them, right? Lizette, did you want to add anything here?
Yeah, especially, thank you, Hannah. No, no, I think these are spot on, and oftentimes it's more difficult, kind of learning how they present themselves virtually. And so ensuring you communicate with your students as well, your availability afterwards, in case you are, because sometimes, so I'm thinking here of some of our participants who are not in the class, and but there's a, they're teaching via Zoom or another platform to a room full. That's going to be a little bit more challenging. So again, in light of, and to keep within the spirit of this, making yourself available after or at any point, in case there is something that might start out as an initial atypical or expression of something that can escalate later on, where they might then feel comfortable enough to share. But these are great.
Yeah, and I think to build on that too is having in that meeting with the pre-meeting with the classroom teacher, kind of understanding the dynamics of the class, what you might expect, and what may or may not be typical for those students. So the next point that I wanted to add is creating a plan to support triggered students. So we'll dive into this a little bit further too. I think one of the most important things to do is to not highlight things that would indicate a student is triggered. So you don't want to be like, hey, so-and-so, your camera's off and it's usually on. What's going on over there? Instead, be really sensitive to the idea. This is that, consistently screening for trauma, right? That this could be a reaction to trauma. It might not be content that you would interpret as being triggering, but for that student, it could be, right? Like something around STIs, gender identity, a student turns their camera off, don't highlight it, address it separately. And so then create a plan before class, before anything starts, about what you would need to do to end the class to support a student, or even not end it, but just kind of divert it. So who can take over while you connect with a student? Can you get multiple facilitators on the line to be helping? So one person can tend to a potentially triggered student, maybe in a breakout room or in a chat, while somebody else leads the discussion. Or conversely, quickly initiate breakout groups so students can talk amongst themselves. And if you're doing that, plan for, what kinds of questions would I ask students to discuss in this moment? Plan all of that ahead of time if you can. And then finally, come up with what your threshold is for just needing to end class. I'm not saying this is going to happen, any kind of emergency scenario. I mean, you all are doing this, you know how regularly something like that would happen, but it's good to just have in your mind, like, what would need to happen for me to just need to call it and focus solely on this one student. And then the next point is knowing how to respond to these disclosures, right? So again, all of this can be different for synchronous versus asynchronous approaches. It might be a little bit easier in an asynchronous approach to not highlight these things and to have this plan to support students, because you could just reach out to them via email or chat or something. But in terms of how to respond to disclosures, that could be different. And I think we should all expect disclosures, whether that be of types of victimization, different types of identities that they might be finding out about or disclosing for the first time. But I would expect folks to be disclosing information. And it's really important to know how to respond to them in this context, particularly because it's a great opportunity to model a positive response. And I know that this group, I'm preaching to the choir of how to, properly respond to disclosures, but I just love this graphic, so I thought I would share it with you so you have it as a resource. But I think you can also share this in advance with your students, right? So believe them, respond empathetically, respect boundaries, all of these things. But the addendum I would add here is share with them what your mandatory reporting requirements are too, right? So when responding to a disclosure, be very clear about what your limitations are and how you can support them, and what you can and cannot do. Okay, my thing is just moving a little slow. All right. And so the last thing that I'll tell you, I think you can do before class is give students some time to prepare for the class itself. So I would not assume that students are reading a syllabus, but rather, as best as you can, make them aware the day before, the week before, in some capacity, the content, the specific content that you'll be discussing next week, so that students who might feel triggered by something can prepare for it, can choose to opt out of it. But making them aware of it the day of might be challenging. And so very intentionally, proactively finding ways to alert students to what the content will be, I think will be helpful. Synchronous, you could have the classroom teacher do this in advance. You could, the session before, let them know what the session coming next will be about. And asynchronous, like a pop-up bubble, whatever your format is, you can find ways to alert students to that. So I'll pass it over to Lizette now to cover some key tech considerations for some of this as well.
I don't know if y'all can hear me. Thank you, Hannah, so much. I think these are excellent points. Whether, again, you're working face-to-face or virtually, as Hannah mentioned, is slightly different. And one of the things I want to emphasize a lot today is something Hannah alluded to, which is the constant, even though we know these things, it's so important when we're working, as trauma-informed providers, to constantly never assume that we have all the points, and we have to remind ourselves of these over and over, and we have to remind our students. In the, even if we've mentioned it a million times, we want to mention it 1,000,001. And so within the virtual space, all of this is kind of challenging to do at times as well. So we want to add the final point I want to add in terms of the preparation is making sure you have the technological competence. This is something that none of us, at least you were actually looking for it. We were not trained to do any of this work virtually. So, we have to try our best to remain as informed as we can in terms of the technology, the platform that we have been given to work with, and how to responsibly use that technology that has been selected for us or that we're working with through a thorough understanding of the functioning, of how it functions, the strengths, limitations, and to also share that with the students. So of course, this has to do with privacy, confidentiality, the data integrity. And by data integrity, I mean what happens to the data after the class, and assuring students, again, I'm going to be interweaving issues around privacy, because privacy is such a critical issue in trauma-informed practice. This is a new level when we're working in virtual spaces. Security of that data, if it's recorded, and how that information is not going to be leaked later on and potentially used against them. And because oftentimes that's the mentality, and so we have to ensure that that they are in a safe place, and safety goes beyond the session when it's recorded. And so again, much of this might have already been laid out for you at your school or your center, but having this information about your platform is important to adequately address concerns that students may have. And I want to bring back to what Hannah had said before about understanding the rules and processes about mandatory reporting. You understanding them and your students as well is so critical. So there are no surprises to the student when they disclose and might not have realized that even under an anonymous setting in their state, that is a disclosure, and you have to follow through with that on your, following through on your mandatory. So I like to talk about all of this under the umbrella of technological competence. So thinking when you're preparing your class, when you're preparing your content, and you are going to be in a virtual setting, thinking about that component, that technological, to make sure you have all of these areas covered. I think, yeah, go to the next slide.
Great. I think next we're going to be talking a little bit about some things that you can actually be doing during the class itself. So while it's ongoing, this going to sound like a broken record, but at the beginning of the class, you're always going to just want to start by being super clear about those mandatory reporting protocols, but also just being upfront about what your trauma-informed approach looks like, that really dives deep into some of those 6 key SAMHSA principles that I highlighted earlier. So trustworthiness, transparency, all of that is related to just being very clear upfront, describing completely what the trauma-informed approach is, and will build that collaboration and mutuality that will allow for these disclosures to happen in a safe way if necessary. Next, which I saw some of you in the chat describing you do, setting some ground rules. Some examples for what this might look like in an online space are listed here. So again, these are from the Michigan Organization for Adolescent Sexual Health, shared some of these with me. So things like not using, making a rule about no screenshots or recording, making webcams optional, turning off that private chat feature, and then to Lizette's point, identifying your other technological capacities that you can use to find other more effective ways to communicate. But also just working with the group to create other relevant ground rules, right? I mean, the youth that you're working with are likely very technologically savvy and have ideas about what would make them feel safe. And so I would guess soliciting that from them would be really helpful. And plus that, again, taps into this feeling of collaboration and peer support. Peers will get to hear one another talk about what it would mean to create a trauma-informed space with one another. And I think that that would be really meaningful to some. So I would also think about attending to these nonverbal cues and being ready to initiate those plans to support triggered students that you would have come up with before class. So getting those multiple facilitators involved, initiating those breakout groups, and just consistently tending to the potential needs of students in the group. I'm going to let Lizette dive back into this piece and talk a little bit more on these topics as well. I think you're muted, Lizette.
Sorry, my computer froze. Yeah, so am I still muted?
No, I can hear you.
Okay, great. Okay, yeah, so there are some other options related to key considerations for successful implementation. Related to privacy, you want to make sure you give your students some options. Sharing is not always necessary. So we're talking here about trauma-informed approaches. And one thing that I love to do when I work in, so my research is actually with PTSD and high, severe profound traumas. I don't like to use the word trauma-informed because oftentimes some of the things we want to emphasize here are absolutely trauma-informed, but I feel like oftentimes students, it lands better with them when you take it to a different level. So oftentimes, so for example, many youth don't even know or even remember that sharing isn't always necessary. That's part of just basic respectful, I'm blocking a word right now. I'm usually in Spanish. Just respectful of how you respect each other and the information you're sharing without necessarily having to have a verbal engagement. So you want to encourage nonverbal forms of engagement. I saw someone bring up the right to pass earlier. I like to remind people of that every single session. You have a right to pass. You don't necessarily want to share at the moment. Give them options ahead of time so they're not mulling over if it's appropriate or not to share, and deliver this in sometimes third person so that individual doesn't have to necessarily feel singled out if the example hits close to home. But you want to ensure privacy at all times and at all levels, and that's what I mean by not necessarily calling it trauma informed. Sometimes I say, hey, this is just privacy. You deserve the right to have full privacy, the privacy that you want, and so do we. And that is absolutely trauma-informed without having to say the word trauma-informed. So this is, again, critical for privacy, but then another thing I really want to emphasize in a virtual setting that we didn't think about a lot, like post-pandemic, is allowing time to process the information that was shared. Now, that purposely says times, because that might not always be after the session. So this is a big one. But this is also for the students, but also the providers. You want to allow time or different times to process the information that was just shared. And this could be right away, which is usually what we used to do. You want to make time for this. Oftentimes, after the session, on our drive home or walk back to the office or back to the class, we were able to process what we just shared or what we just experienced in a group, even briefly. And we often don't have that anymore in virtual settings. We either just log on to another session or just, open the door and the family's there or whoever you're living with is there. And so you want to encourage students and, again, providers to take time in a sometimes a structured or guided homework assignment might be something good, but you really want to make sure you take that time. Next slide. Okay, so we want to hear a little bit more from you all again. So what virtual nonverbal cues do you often in your experience?
I'm having a hard time seeing the chat just with the way that I'm sharing my screen.
I can read out some of the chats as they come
Oh,
through.
thank you.
Nothing yet.
Okay, great. Maybe we'll keep going, and when they come through, we can tap into them a little bit. Because I do want to, go ahead.
Looking away from the camera or turning off the camera, which we talked about.
Mm-hmm. So as folks are thinking of more, let's just take a quick minute to talk about some of the things that you can do that are in a trauma-informed spirit for after class as well. So the first of these in my mind is following up with students who might need additional support. And so that might seem really obvious, but the ways that you do this in a virtual setting could be really different, right? So after in an in-person class, you might just pull them aside in the hallway, ask them to hang out, talk to them at a different time. In this scenario, you have to be a little bit more intentional. I mean, you can always chat them and ask them to stay on the Zoom a little bit longer, but you can also take this opportunity to collect some resources that you think might be potentially helpful, some context that may be potentially helpful to share with them too. And this can be done, you could reach out directly to that student and form that connection with them, or you could reach out to the whole class without targeting anybody in specifically, right? So saying, hey, that content was really difficult today. I just wanted to pass along the following resources to everybody here, just in case you need them, right? And then, let students do with that what they will, but, hoping that the students that need it will take you up on it. And again, always being really clear about those mandatory reporting requirements. I would also encourage you to touch base with that classroom teacher as it makes sense, just to follow up on did you see anything I didn't see? Once maybe touch base on one student reacted this way. Is that typical for them? Is there any additional support we can provide there? And then similarly, reviewing those fidelity logs and any post-implementation feedback you have to identify areas where the course may have gone differently than you anticipated. Was it harder for students than you thought it would be? Did it go a little bit more smoothly? And how can you continue to tailor the material to be trauma-informed as you go based on the experience students are having? And then share that across your facilitation team so that all of the materials can be implemented accordingly. And then of course, always attempt to take care of yourself, which feels like we all just say that these days, but I really appreciate what Lizette was saying before about, having to find and carve out those times to process any of these difficult experiences that might be happening, and modeling that for your students, letting them know, maybe this is what I'm going to do. This class was tough, this content was tough, and here's what I'm going to do after class today to support myself. Please feel free to share what you're going to do today too. So, again, I would think really critically about this as an synchronous versus asynchronous environments, where following up with students you could do in either scenario, but you can be a little bit more tactful in some of the ways that you're connecting with those classroom teachers based on whether it was a synchronous or asynchronous environment. And then I'll pass it over to
Hannah, before we go there, I just want to share some
please.
feedback that we got. So also deliberately not responding when asked a question. So this could be, I imagine, either via chat, like a way that's not just on camera. Someone mentioned kids might move their laptop to not show their whole face. So you're kind of looking at the ceiling when they're experiencing something. Another person mentioned that cameras are off at all times. So we might need to use different tools to try to assess engagement. And then someone else mentioned like disconnecting from the content, or again, like not engaging anymore. They might have been really engaged before and then pulled away.
Mhm. Yeah, if you're in a scenario where students are consistently always off camera, I would encourage touch points that allow for you to assess and screen for trauma as you go, whether it be like having folks type things in the chat and then taking note of who's not, making it optional and taking note of who's not responding, and following up with those youth as it makes sense. I mean, some youth might typically not respond, right? Like that might be very normal for them. And so if they're not responding, maybe it's not cause for concern. But others, you might say, oh, you know, this person's usually a little bit more engaged. And you have to identify opportunities to assess that. So it might be a chat, it might be a homework assignment. You know, it might be a breakout session where you ask folks to turn cameras on with one other person or something like that, but I would encourage that. So I'll pass it over to Lizette one more time before we go to the spotlights from the field section.
Yeah, just thank you, Hannah. One last thing I wanted to mention is I want to bring together, I talked a little bit before about technological competency, and Hannah has really given a nice overview of so many different angles for getting a really good trauma-informed focus to, or how to bring that in at different levels to your content. So you want to bring in, you know, that trauma-informed focus with the technological, and that's exactly, you know, essentially that's that virtual environment telepresence. And this, we've discussed it several times already, but you know, when you think about how much the world has changed in this past year, and for someone who has done telehealth like a couple years before the pre-pandemic, it's pretty incredible to see that, you know, how much, you know, and how expanded the capacity we've all built this past year, all our students have built, and now we have this format, we have this option. There are some of you who aren't even using this, but now can use this, and this can be a really good option for reaching students that weren't able to have access before. And so being able to build on this and applying appropriate techniques within this space so that you can learn to better foster spontaneity, provide support, reach your students, can really go a long way. And so with that, I want to turn to our spotlight so we can hear the wonderful things going on in the field.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Hi, my name is Leslie Estrella. I am from Westcare Pacific Islands Project ISATA Prep Pathways. So if we have the next slide, please. So again, Hofading, that is our local greeting here. It is, it's our greeting here in the Chamorro language here on Guam. I say good morning because it is 5:47. So disclaimer, and you know, to be a little bit more confident here, if you hear chickens in the background, you are not hallucinating. It's about dawn, so they're very active, and you can hear them inside my house. So again, Project ISATA, it is another unfamiliar word to most of you. ISATA means our rainbow. So Project ISATA Prep Pathways is a part of Westcare. It is a nonprofit organization which has several different agencies across the US nation and territories. And we are dedicated to uplifting the human spirit. Project ISATA Prep Pathways, in particular, our program here, we are located on Guam and in Palau. So Guam, as you know, it's a US territory. We're a tiny, tiny island in the Middle Pacific. Population stands about 180,000, last I checked. And our program specifically is a prevention education program for youth that aims to prevent teen pregnancies, reduce HIV, STI infections, improve safe sex behaviors, delay the onset of drug and alcohol use, increase self-empowerment, and to build healthy relationships. We're a CPREP grantee, and we provide the curriculum called Draw the Line, Respect the Line. And our service delivery, pre-pandemic and actually still now, our service delivery includes partnerships and curriculum delivery to 4 of our local public middle schools, and community-based events, which entails summer camps and workshops in collaboration with our other projects here at West Care Pacific Islands. So next slide, please. So our story, I know we're all going through something similar, but in terms of the coronavirus, unfortunately made its way here to our island around March of last year, March 2020, which caused an island-wide shutdown. And it was right in the middle of one of the cohorts, so there was a lot of shifting that had to happen. Next challenge, of course, was the different statuses and ever-changing statuses of the local executive orders in terms of face-to-face interactions and island-wide operations. So schools went from not having, they were scrambling, they were trying to figure out how to even provide their lessons and grade level wise to their current students. And then for school year 2021, it opened back up, right? Quote unquote, opened back up to 3 learning platforms for families to choose from their students: virtual, hard copy, and face-to-face. The struggle, however, were typically face-to-face incorporated into the school schedule, and the face-to-face sessions were just once a week. And on top of that, the local schools here were having difficulty even tracking down and finding their students. I think by the time it was October or September, we were told by one of our school sites they couldn't even get a hold of 200 of their students. And imagine with our tiny population and the 4 schools that we have that we're present in, that was really difficult. So we throttled into survival mode, which included what everyone is doing is virtual implementation and the different strategies that we've tried. So next slide, please. So of course, there's the virtual shift, virtual implementation of the curriculum. Our social media presence have been heightened to try and get the messaging out there to our general, to the general community. We received technical assistance, collaborate, and to see what adaptations are there, and just took what we had already in terms of PowerPoint presentations and the skill level that our youth educators have, just to deliver these services virtually. Networking continued. We continue to foster relationships with our partners, namely the school administrators, the superintendent, as well as the school counselors who worked, side by side with us throughout these years of updating us on the current climate of their school sites, giving us referrals for other activities that we had available that were made available to the community. And those included the school breaks. Instead of our typical on-site, in-person, or even just virtual delivery, because there was a semester where we weren't able to implement anything, we also just extended it to the general population with middle schoolers during school breaks. Next, please. So of course, adapting and adjusting. And in terms of, I don't really use trauma-informed either, that term. And even as a social worker, I was like, it's in different settings, but in our common struggle right now with the pandemic and seeing how kids had to shift during the island-wide shutdown, we not only have to recognize the struggle, right, of our school sites, but we are aware of the struggles that children may have while adapting to the virtual setting. It could just be as simple as just not used to seeing their friends every day, or just being cooped up at the house. Or also we all have the understanding of the struggle of parents who have to juggle working from home or working on site, leaving their kids at home with caretakers. It's something that we're all made aware of here in our island, or even parents and families who are currently dealing with not having a job or reliable transportation. So in our school break series, everything was virtual. We did a packet pickup, and this occurred during winter break and spring break. Fortunately for us right now, with 2 of our school sites, we were able to have online delivery, and one of our school one of our school sites is strictly online delivery, but an after school setting, the counselors have given us an after school time to, and recruited for us and along with us to give us participants. And another school site is both face to face. But just to highlight and mention, sorry, I didn't mention, we are synchronous. So everything is real time, attendance is taken and so forth. And also our summer camps. During last year, we were fortunate enough that one of the executive orders allowed health and human services, human services and nonprofit agencies to resume operations, but very limited of what we're used to. We're used to recruiting 40, we had 17. So we're just very happy about that. Next slide. So we talk about safety, and yes, that is our utmost, that is our priority in person and in virtual. So prior to the start of every class, once we have our roster, emails are sent out, parents are, talked to over the phone of what to expect, the family wise. And we tell the students, and the counselors help us reiterate this, that if they're taking it online virtually, to have a safe, quiet space as much as possible. Our island is made up of a lot of families who are like multi-generation homes, right? So it's not just a nuclear family. So siblings share a room. It's a lot of struggle that we're aware of too. But knowing that prior to every class sessions, friendly reminders are emailed out with links, times, what to expect for that day. And we continue to create a comfortable space for the students during the sessions, right? So music is playing, not much dead air is going on while everyone's trying to log on. We also have more than one youth educator as well as our research assistant kind of online just to field the chat, just to see who's there, aside from just the primary presenter. So we also start off with what to expect, that all of us do. Rules and etiquette, not just turn off your mic, turn on your camera, or turn off your camera if you don't feel comfortable, but it's like what each of the participants can expect from our team and what we expect from them. Respect, the way there's just the little mannerisms, and they come up with their rules and also agree upon them as well. It is our youth educator that brought up the rites to pass. We do that frequently throughout the day or our class period, which is just about an hour. And then they assess comfort levels. That's why we have an additional youth educator, an additional team member on the side, just to see and get a feel for how the students are acting, right, on camera or off camera or on the chat. And we also provide them the option to, if they participate and it's a discussion, they have the option to direct message, like privately message the youth educator that's presenting, or one of the other youth educators that's there in class virtually. So it's as safe as possible. And we also inform and not police. And it's, I don't know, back in my generation, that's what we call police. Like we just don't call them out. Even the way we speak to them and we present ourselves online in our little thumbnails, the youth educators are great at that, is opening and as welcoming as possible. And in terms of families, access to service is always there, virtual settings, and those that don't probably have the resources to have these activities done at home. We choose activities where we can provide the materials for the families and for the participants and make arrangement accommodations for pickup. So everything is there, like scratch paper, pens, and we choose activities and engaging activities that can be done at home. Next is the prevention protocol. I did mention we did have one summer camp in person. So we had to kind of shift to making sure the families of the participants and the participants themselves feel safe. So sneeze guards, personal sanitization kits, these are in person. So we try to make that, very, I guess, real in front of them and teaching them responsibilities and incorporating even a sanitization schedule within the summer camp agenda. It's not fun, but these kids were released out from lockdown at least once for the summer, and they were with us, so we wanted to make them feel safe. And this was last year. Next, please. And there goes the chickens. team wellness. And, you know, what we've incorporated as well is just as we all know, it starts at home. And our home is our team, our home is our office, our home is our program. And we're small. There's all of us are here online right now in the webinar. We have 3 youth educators on our team, 1 research assistant, and myself on Guam. And in Palau, there's 2. So for our team, for prep, the prep team on Guam, team wellness is a big, big thing. We were also going through the motions of the shutdown, working from home, not seeing each other every day. And literally we were ready like a family. So it's kind of like being separated from your siblings. So it's important. And we acknowledge that. So since it starts with us, we wanted to make sure, even if it was virtual and remote working, we wanted to make sure we checked in with each other during team meetings that we have weekly. Aside from our weekly team meetings where work is very delineated and discussed and schedules and inundated with what we have to do, we also incorporated, at one point it was weekly and we were doing great at it, but we do it at least monthly, wellness meetings, where it's not about work, but it was about us, morale. We talk about wellness challenges, self-care tips, you know, and also on top of probably a debrief of stuff that went on during a session. Nothing so heavy so far, and we're doing well. And also our supervisions are pretty regular. So next. And like I mentioned and somewhere in the beginning of the slides, our social media presence have been heightened. So we know there were a lot of limitations. Our goal was a higher number, and we're only reaching a minimal amount with the things that we do virtually. But now we also have a social media plan that includes under West Care Pacific Islands, but each of our programs, but specifically for ours, we have a social media plan that we roll out using, you know, videos. And we like to use the staff. So the kids who are going to be enrolled into our program, they have a face to the name already. And we have messaging there like healthy relationships, myths and realities of relationships, and empowerment stuff. So if you're interested, we do have a Facebook page, and as well as an Instagram that's here. So you guys can go ahead and check that out. And sorry, next slide. This is our contact information. And that's it. That is it for us. And we want to say thank you for inviting us and having us over.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Leslie. And now we're going to hear from Brooke and Corey.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brooke, and with me today.
Hello, everybody. My name is Corey Rodriguez.
And we are the Baby Safe Health Educators. Who we are as a program, we are committed to preparing and connecting young adults with the resources needed to be empowered about their sexual and reproductive health. We service 3 Alamo community colleges, and we offer evidence-based and evidence-informed sexual health programs to community college students that are between the ages of 14 and 19 years old, or 20 if they're pregnant and parenting. We do focus on referrals to healthcare services in the community, such as STI and HIV testing, pregnancy testing, annual exams, birth control, etc., for free or low-cost services, and then also offer sexual health resources, kind of a one-stop shop for anything sexual health related for the community college students. Corey's going to get us kickstarted with the trauma-informed practices that we use during our SHARP evidence-informed program.
All right, so let's get into it. So some of the things that we do before the session to stay trauma informed is we actually, whenever we are recruiting and completing outreach, that we will call and introduce ourselves to each participant prior to each session, because our workshops are a one-time workshop. You know, we're not having continuous lessons with our students. We want to try and be as available and upfront on who is going to be providing and providing that content for them. And then we also send a camera disclaimer in our email. I know that's something that has been talked about. So something that we let our students know when we're confirming their session is that we, while we don't require camera or microphones to be on during the entire session, we do at least ask that people confirm who they are and at least show face for the very beginning of the session. So that way it creates a safe space for not only our participants, for myself and Brooke as well. So this is a little bit of an example of what we put. Again, while we don't require someone to have their camera or microphone through the entire Zoom session for the safety of the group and the nature of the conversation, we do ask that we see face at the beginning of each session to confirm who someone is.
All right, and then once the session begins, we do preface the session with talking about sexual issues. So some of the things that we discuss is that if you feel comfortable at any point and prefer not to participate, we've talked about the right to pass, but they can choose not to participate at any section. We also like to verbalize that we don't assume everyone is engaging in sex or not engaging in sex, and that we don't assume anyone's gender identity or expression, that everyone is welcome to participate, to make sure that is verbalized in the beginning of our session, and that people have different values, morals, and backgrounds, and we don't expect everyone to agree. We also allow people to rename themselves, and we do a verbal or via chat introduction in the beginning to make sure that students are heard and are being called what they prefer to be called, so that Corey and I are respecting the name that they prefer to go by. We do use a platform called Pear Deck. It's a Google Slides add-on, and there is anonymous engagement when utilizing our sessions. And we'll talk a little bit more about how we use that in our sessions. And then we also do use group agreements with Pear Deck. So something I'd like to point out, if you look at the right, joinpd.com, Pear Deck is mobile friendly. So that is also something that we focus on if students only have one mobile device. And although it's easier to engage with us on a computer platform, Pear Deck is mobile friendly. And so give students the link where they can open another web browser, or I always mention joinpd.com using the code on the screen if they have a mobile device and prefer to do that. If you see on the group agreement slide at the bottom, you see that bar that says some students write your response. That is what it would look like with Pear Deck. And then we could see each of the responses without a name attached to that response, which is really, really helpful. Some things continued, like we mentioned, some nonverbal cues and check-ins. When students have their cameras off, if they have their cameras on, or participants, we can ask them to just give like a verbal smile or thumbs up. But if their camera's off, we ask them to use a reaction. And we practice that in the beginning of the session, but then utilize it throughout the session. And we will, Corey or myself, whether we are co-facilitating, whoever's not facilitating, might reach out, and we'll show you an example of what that looks like. We do encourage them, and other people have mentioned this, to private chat anytime during the session to ask anonymous questions. So if someone puts a question or a comment in the chat and it's to everyone, we address it by name. But if it's anonymous and private chat to us, we say someone reached out, and then we engage in the conversation that way, just to further show them privacy. So this is an example of what we would do for participation. We do prefer if everyone kept their camera on, but if someone decides to turn their camera off, we ask that they participate in the activities and or the chat. If someone is an active baby safe, we'll reach out via chat to make sure everything's okay. And we just really show them like, we care about you and your safety. And so we might reach out to make sure everything's okay and really neutralize that check-in. It's not a huge deal or that they did something wrong. It's just that we care about them.
All right, and as we get further during the session, some other things that we do. Brooke had mentioned that we use Pear Deck, and that's an attachment with Google Slides that we use. And she also mentioned that it's going to be completely anonymous for students to post. So we are able to also, again, track the participation on Pear Deck. So if a student were to answer a question, we were able to see all of the responses that come in, but there's no name that's attached to it. So again, we can see those responses, but we have no idea who is saying what. And what we're also able to do with that engagement is we also pause our share screen. So that way we're able to pull up those responses, and the participants are not able to see the exact responses that are being put in. We're kind of able to kind of filter what it is that's being said. And that way we're able to, if someone is saying that, saying something that may be a little bit inappropriate or maybe a little too personal, something that is important is no personal stories in our group agreements. So we're able to kind of filter and kind of rework the question or the response. So that way we're still acknowledging what that person said and addressing either their question or their response. But again, we're able to kind of filter it to where we have that trauma-informed language embedded in that as well. And then again, of course, tracking that participation on Pear Deck. we're able to see how many students have logged on, and we're also able to see how many of those people are engaging with us for a certain question. We also give participants a heads up. So if we're going to be, for example, for our anatomy lesson, I do give everyone a space like, hey, just to let everybody know, we're going to be moving into our anatomy lesson, and we're going to be taking a look at illustrations of different reproductive body parts, such as a vulva and a penis. So that's going to be an example of a heads up, and giving everyone kind of a minute to kind of settle with that and kind of process what I said. So that way they're able to do whatever it is that they need to do to feel safe and to feel comfortable. And then of course, double monitoring is available for us. So if that's going to be either another screen that we use, or if that's the other educator that we're utilizing, we're able to, again, utilize the chat, see all of the participants on our screens. And then of course, because we're always encouraging people to private chat us, just having that always up. You can kind of see an example, of course, 1 out of 1. And then of course, you're able to keep up with us on Instagram. We are on Instagram. We're a little bit Instagram famous. We have over 500 followers. I know, goodness. But your students are able to keep up with us through here as well. So we do kind of refer back to our Instagram throughout our sessions. We do have in our highlights clinic information for clinics that we refer to. We have little trips and ticks, because we make TikToks, tips and tricks, wow, on our TikToks. So we do make those and we post them here as well. I made a TikTok about myself getting tested. I went and talked about all of the steps and what that looked like and what was required. And Brooke has made fantastic TikToks about who's stronger, a condom or Brooke. Guess what? The condom won. So we encourage students to take a look at our information. And of course, DM us for either guidance or questions. It's going to be either myself or Brooke that touch the Instagram. We're the only ones that have access to it. So again, it's just kind of reinforcing that we're going to be with the students every step of the way. And of course, check us out, HFTX_babysafe. I think it's pretty cool, but I'm a little bit biased.
And that's it for us. Thanks, everyone. If you would like to reach out to us after the fact, you could always DM us on Insta as well.
Absolutely.
Katie, I think you might be muted.
Thanks. I was just saying, awesome. Thank you so much. I know there will be some requests for those TikToks, so people can find you there. I want to go ahead and open it up to questions and answers with the presenters. I know there was a lot of really great information shared, both from Leslie and Brooke and Corey. Thank you for your time and your input, and thank you, Hannah and Lisette, for your input as well. And for some reason, my slides don't want, there we go. I'm not seeing anything in the Q&A or in the chat. So if folks want to take a moment, or you can raise your hand and I think we can unmute you that way. I know I had a question, and I was curious, I'll just throw this out to all of our panelists. For those folks who are presenting to a room in which the students might be together and the presenter is on like virtually, what are some strategies that they can do or that they might implement in advance or during the class to make sure that everything's staying on track? Any suggestions there? And for those of you who are implementing in those settings, if you want to share the strategies that you're using in the chat, that would be great as well.
If I can, Leslie mentioned having a co-facilitator, and you might not necessarily have you might not necessarily have that in a virtual setting, but in other groups that I have done, if you are not able to have a peer co-facilitator, and you're able to, I would try to train a student participant. So have a student, you will have to work with them a little bit more before and after, not only in terms of getting them up to speed for what they're looking for when they're there, they are actually there physically, but then also working with them for any potential vicarious traumatization. If that ever gets to that level, it might not. But Katie, one option might be to train a student you get so much insight from students when you actually train them to co-facilitate, and they learn so much and they get so much more out of it. It's a wonderful experience. And there's an opportunity for that, I really encourage that, because that might be very difficult for the provider when they are the ones that give the sense to be able to have someone there. But maybe a student co-facilitator that's present might be a good option.
Great. It's a great idea. Thanks for sharing. I do see a question. A couple ideas, and Tony or Troy, I'm sorry, says that for their schools, they've adapted schedules to ensure that they can give them as much assistance from the facilitators as possible. And Kelsey mentions that having a co-facilitator or peer educator with you is great, especially when you're virtual. They've run into tech issues where the presenter has lost connection and the other had to swoop in. Yeah, that's a good point. So making sure they know kind of what's covered that day, and maybe they can run the discussion. We did have one question. Angel asked that said that she loved the examples of guidelines such as camera disclosure that Baby Be Safe mentioned, and would you be willing to email a complete list of your guidelines that you send to your students before class? Or you could post it on the Exchange comment wall, which is it's only visible to registered Exchange users. So I don't know, Brooke or Corey, if that would be comfortable for you, sharing some examples there, or you can feel free to email, like develop a Word document or something. And you don't have to answer right now. Another question that came in that I'll throw out to everyone is, how do you make sure that students are in a safe environment when sharing sexual health or risky behavior information with them? One of their concerns has been that either younger children or possibly someone who doesn't feel that someone else who doesn't feel that the information is relevant might be receiving it.
I think that that's where some of those ground rules come in about things like headphones and asking students to make sure they're in a space where, with like a closed door or a more private space. As Leslie was mentioning, that's not always an option, right? Like when we're living with family members and multi-generational homes that folks are sharing bedrooms. And so things like the headphones, I think, are really important. But I also am thinking of the suggestions that Corey and Brooke made about how we're not wanting students to share personal accounts in these interactions. So ideally, any kind of information would be coming into those headphones and they wouldn't need to be speaking anything out, right? Do other folks want to add there?
Yeah, go ahead, Corey.
Yeah, so something that we utilize, at least in Baby Safe, is just having every opportunity for a student to be able to private chat or private message us, because we also understand that, again, some people may be in a space where they're sharing with siblings or with family members or with other students. So we give them that opportunity to be able to type up their responses either. And we have opportunities for Pear Deck in private chat and Zoom. We also have, I provide everybody my work text line so someone can also text me, and Brooke as well. So again, we kind of create a lot of different spaces, and on Instagram as well, a lot of different avenues and a lot of different spaces where students will be able to access how to get in touch with us anonymously and privately.
And I would just like to add that if someone drops off of our session, Corey and I are really diligent about following up with someone via text, whatever method that they've preferred to engage with us or that they have engaged with us, we follow up with them. So we utilize a platform called Google Voice, where we have work numbers, and we do preface that we utilize those numbers between the hours of 9 to 5. We'll try our best to get back to them if it's outside those hours. Otherwise, expect a text back the next business day. And making sure that we are engaging with them and really building that rapport. But as Corey mentioned, like if someone does direct message us, assuming that it wants to be addressed anonymously. And then I was going to add one more thing, but I think I forgot. So I think that's it for us.
No problem. And there's another comment in the chat. Letisa mentions that during a session, they use music after a deep topic to lighten the atmosphere. And they also use Guardian on Google Meet to let students ask a question in private to the teacher, who then lets staff know through private text what the question is. That way, both the teacher and the facilitator know if it's a mandatory reporting subject. And it's just another way. So it sounds like Leticia, that the teacher's in the room with the students, or that there's a way at least for the students to get to the teacher so they can get to you. And I
Yeah.
think I just want to recognize that it's exhausting to have to check so many different places, like for possible entry or where people can get in touch with you, but I think it's really helpful, and we see the work that everyone's doing, and it's really hard. So thank you for that. Other questions that folks have? And Lisette, did you want to say something? Did I cut somebody off?
Oh, that was me.
Sorry, Leslie.
Another option that we give towards the end of the class is just a few minutes for what we would have in person as a comment box. You know, anonymous notes and stuff would have been perfect in person, but it is given some time for the students to be like, hey, if there's something you want to bring up to us after the session and all that, that's where they have that period of time to start DMing or just direct privately messaging the youth educators. So it's not only during, but we have that option afterwards. And it also is reminded to them that, you know, privacy, we do have mandated reporting requirements and all that, but we give them at least that opportunity to think about it. Hey, this is your chance. And it happens daily for the sessions that we have. It's another comment box, virtual comment box. I forget what our youth educators call it, but that's what we would have called it in person.
Great. Yeah, thank you offering those. And then Kelsey mentions that the music is great, but they struggled a little bit with knowing the volume on the other end. And I know my kids listen to their classes at full blast. I'm like, how can you even hear that? The teacher's screaming at you, but that's what they like. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and keep us moving. We only have about 10 more minutes, but feel free, if you have more questions, please put them in the Q&A or the chat. We wanted to give potentially to create some space for reflection and processing. We know everyone's really busy, so we wanted to create it within this webinar for you. We wanted you to think about what approaches have been successful for your group with respect to trauma-informed care in a virtual setting, and what ideas were shared today that you would like to learn more about. So if you could just take a couple minutes and think to yourself how you would like to, sort of what ideas you have on these two questions, that would be great. Sorry, I just messed up. And you can chat them in if you'd like, but you're not required to. You can write them down. On the next webinar, I'm going to have nice music playing during this time.
I have a quick question for the baby group. I absolutely love that some of your content, especially post-session, is available on Instagram, and that you're creating TikToks. I mean, especially, you know, TikTok is such an incredible use of technology where you can be delivering information and be funny and relevant. And so do you have any tips for providers for creating their own TikToks, for like any resources for how to do these, how to, you know, I mean, I'm sure there's a bunch of stuff out there, but anything that worked for you all, or are you just, you know, TikTok savvy?
I will say TikTok humbled me. I thought I was tech savvy, and then making TikToks it's really difficult. But just carving out some time to brainstorm. We have brainstorming meetings where we actually set up a structure for our social media so that our content is derived. Our followers don't know that, but it's derived from like a schedule or some sort of theme, something like that. And then Corey and I are constantly listening for what participants are mentioning, and if they're like, if this myth is often coming up, like right now we have a myth that keeps coming up that condoms break really often, and that's why college students aren't using them. And so we address myths on that, or relevant topics that students are talking to us, and it sparks an idea, and we're like, what if we made a TikTok about that? So we like to just sprinkle in some things that we wouldn't necessarily be able to relay in a post or even a video because it's a little bit all over the place. A TikTok is a great way to deliver that message in a cohesive way. And Corey has helped me a ton with TikTok, but it does take some work.
The mix is brilliant because, you know, we're competing now with TikTok where they're getting all this information. I love that. This
And
is really-
Kelsey wants to know if you knew how to use TikTok before this time. If you were like a familiar.
No, I was the one that had to pioneer TikTok to the Baby Safe team. It's just such a really cool way that we can sprinkle it in our sessions, and we're able to kind of provide that supplemental information without having to take away from the fidelity and programming that we need to focus on, because we are on, you know, some of our sessions are, for example, for Sharp, it's only 4 hours long, and we only have 4 hours, not a minute more to complete that. So whenever we have, you know, questions coming in about either condoms or birth control or going to clinics, we're able to, hey, check out our Instagram, check out our TikToks. We actually talk about exactly that, and we address kind of these little certain things without having to take out too much time from our programming.
Great. And I think Ricky had a question, and before that, Janet mentioned that she really liked learning how to use platforms like Pear Deck, which can allow for anonymity, but also for tracking. So it's helpful to keep track of students, but also allows anonymous. Ricky, you can go ahead and take yourself off mute and ask your question if you'd like.
I was gonna ask, I know that we have your Instagram handle, but what actually is your TikTok handle? Would you mind putting that in the chat as well, just so that for those who may want to see the videos, we'll have access to that?
Yeah, for sure. Let me put that in the chat. It's also Baby Safe. So let me put that in here. But we, all of the TikToks that we do create, they are put directly on our Instagram. So not all of the TikToks may be on our TikTok page, but they will 100% be on our Instagram and Facebook as well, since we link our Facebook and our Instagram together.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Corey. After you think about kind of what you learned today, I would love for folks to share, if they would like, one step that they might take after this webinar related to providing virtual programming in a trauma-informed way. And you can just share that in the chat if you'd like. And West Care Pacific also has a TikTok, so I'm going to make sure we share that to everybody.
I love this. This is a great asynchronous post session content sharing.
So it sounds like maybe using Pear Deck, utilizing social media platforms more. Great. And I think we heard about how folks have used that to both introduce their staff to the community so that people can get familiar with the faces that they might be seeing, but also to extend the information. Other ideas that folks will be taking away with them or things they're going to try? Providing resources and informing students what the next lesson will be about. So giving them like a little bit of like a little intro before they go on to the next thing. They can prepare themselves. Make sure that, Brooks says that they reference their social media multiple times verbally and then before mentioning the follow at the end of the sessions. Great.
I didn't feel I needed to share that verbally, so I just dropped it in the chat.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and as Trina mentioned, it's also a great way to introduce your organization to the community and build that as folks are just in a virtual space more now. Any other ideas or strategies that folks will be taking away with them after the session today? Different tips on how to know if an online attendee might be struggling with content. I know that's a struggle that I have, is just how to know when that's happening. Great. I did want to provide you with a few resources before we left, and we will be sending a follow-up thank you note for attending the presentation today. So you'll have the hyperlinks for these. We've done a webinar on creating safe spaces. We have a new toolkit on trauma-informed practices. We did develop, that doesn't have a specific virtual bent, but it has a lot of the basic tenets that Hannah was talking about, and some other webinars that might be helpful for you in your work. And then some of the resources that we shared throughout the talk are here today, like SAMHSA's concept, the resources that Hannah mentioned from MOASH, as well as there's some things from CARDIA and the National Traumatic Stress Network. We also have our references. And then I just wanted to remind folks that if you are in need of additional training and technical assistance, or you just want to brainstorm with a TA provider about ways that you might integrate trauma-informed care practices more into your virtual setting, or if you just have some questions about where you might enhance different things, you're welcome to email us at apptta@rti.org, and someone will get back to you within a day or two, or a day, I think. And then I also included Leslie's contact information if you want to get in touch with her, and the Baby Safe handle. I think that is it. Oh, before you go, we do have a little survey. We'd love to hear how this experience was for you, what we can do in the future to make it better, and other ideas that you would like to hear about or learn about in this format. So please click on this, and Lauren has posted it in the chat as well. So please go ahead and click directly on that link and fill out, I think it's like 3 questions. And I just want to say thank you so much for your time and attention and questions and great feedback. And thank you so much to our panelists for their time and input today as well.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, everyone.